This is Duke University.
Thank you. I was just thanking you, and I wanted to thank you for inviting me to this very exciting and rich panel. I'm delighted to be here. I should say that my comments actually come from a recent interest I have developed on the philanthropic imagination as it works in colonial and post-colonial India, especially as directed towards efforts to set up schools and colleges. So I've learned a lot from these presentations and the papers that they sent to me a little earlier. I should also say that the interest that I have, my academic interest in philanthropic work comes from work that I did for a number of years, and I took a break from academia and worked for the Ford Foundation. And I engaged in my version of what I thought was doing good, and we can talk about that. But in my capacity as a historian of the British Empire, I've also spent a lot of time thinking, but also teaching about the Victorian era's civilizing vision, which has had a long shelf life, as all of these papers so richly point out. So I've titled my very brief commentary, Humanitarianism in the Age of the World Picture. And it is my attempt to bring the critical diagnosis of modernity that Martin Heidegger offers us to reflect briefly upon the field of humanitarianism and development that is the subject of this panel. So all three papers are concerned with the manner in which the local rubs up against the global, the national against the international, within the context of the humanitarian impulse. This is an impulse that shifts into high gear, it seems, in an emergency or a crisis, to avert which one has to intervene to set things right. The exercise of this impulse seems to almost always call for immediate actions since there's no time to be lost. We must work for change, seek solutions. That which is wrong must not be allowed to go on, it has to be stopped, etc., etc. So if I can borrow from Martin Luther King from another context, this is an impulse that is clearly propelled by the fierce urgency of now. So how may we want to think about the very notion of such human action and the seeming hubris that underlies it? That through such action, some impending catastrophe can be indeed averted or overcome, and then we can move on to address yet another catastrophic situation which will undoubtedly follow. If we think with Heidegger, we would immediately have to place in question the modern managerial approach to problems and problem solving. In fact, even the very term problems worth thinking about and the manner in which problematic has become such an important part of our academic discourse, right? But along with Heidegger, we would have to question our propensity for technological interventions, our belief in human cognitive power, but above all, our continued commitment to a metaphysics that places us as humans, as subjects, against a world that has been turned into what Heidegger calls standing reserve. For those not familiar with Heidegger and his very important 1952 essay, The Age of the World Picture, from which I'm drawing these comments, it is in the guise of the technological calculative man posing as a master that the world is conceived and grasped as a picture. The world becomes a picture and is able to be modeled because man looks upon it and represents it. In setting the world before and in relationship to himself, man places himself at the center of all relations over which mastery is exercised. And I'm paraphrasing here from Dorothea Olkowski's wonderful commentary on Heidegger's very difficult but wonderful essay, which I would recommend, especially to those who haven't had a chance to look at it. As Liddell McWhorter argues, quote, the thinking that Heidegger saw as essential, the thinking his works call us to do, is not a thinking that seeks to master anything, not a thinking that results from drive to grasp and know and shape the world. It is a thinking that does not quickly put a stop to itself, as thinking intent on finding a fast and efficient solution always tries to do, end quote. So she argues that Heidegger's call cannot be dismissed as quietism, and suggests that on the contrary, he's asking us to be courageous enough to question our drive for acting decisively and forcefully to manage a problem and hence master the world. It is this managerial, technological mode of thinking that has been gathering strength since the birth of modernity, that is well on its way to extinguishing all other ways of being human. So following from this set of reflections, my general question to the panel, and the papers actually have inspired me to take this Heideggerian turn, is to ask what humanitarianism might look like if we abandon this managerial self that calls upon us to masterfully intervene in the name of the human to set things right. In other words, is it possible for us to care for our fellow humans with the realization that we human beings are not, never have been, and never can be in complete control? And relatedly, does this then require us or call upon us also to abandon the scale at which humanitarian operations operate, as we see in all the three cases that have been discussed, but in also many other cases that we know of, that inevitably actually turns the world into picture in Heidegger's terms? So that was sort of, the two sort of questions that I had as a whole for the panel, and then I had a couple specific questions for each one of our panelists. And I begin with Peter, and I loved the paper, Peter, and I have so many thoughts on it, but I wanted to limit myself to one, and the use of a phrase that you did not actually use in the presentation, but is worth sharing, I think, with the audience, where you make the argument that the global North expat, to quote you, is materially heavy and socially light. Ever contingent, swept away by distant concerns. And you contrast that very interestingly with the national staff, which you argue is materially light and socially heavy. A repetitive actor, as you put it in local history. And I found this a wonderful way to be thinking about so many different issues. But the question I had for you, and here I'm really drawing upon my own experiences working for the Ford Foundation and people like me, of which there are many, many now, right, in this landscape of aid, of people who are from the local or the national, but who are now part of the global, and we return to these countries from which we originate to do good, right? So I want to ask whether we would then be considered people like me. This is, of course, completely self-interested kind of question, but I think there's a theoretical push here that I'm asking for. So would you think that people like me and people of this category would be both materially heavy and socially heavy? And there are all kinds of ways in which local attachments, as you put it, the gravity of local attachments then come in, right? So it's a way to get past this binary that you have set out, which is a very productive one. So I wanted whether you could comment on that. And then a related question, not related, another question that came up is actually from the presentation, is this very important point you make, and it really speaks to the Heideggerian argument about the managerial self. The fact that MSF begins as this anti-bureaucratic, oppositional kind, with this kind of ethic, and yet it becomes heavily bureaucratized, right? It takes all this. So I wondered if you could comment on what kinds of struggles were involved in that shift, or do you see that actually as inevitable? My sense was you were seeing that as inevitable, but I was curious to get your sense of that. Elora, if I can turn to you next, even though the order was different. Your paper actually recalled for me Gayatri Spivak's very important formulation, which I'm sure you know about in her analysis of the 19th century ban on sati or widow immolation in colonial India, where she says that such interventions can be seen as a case of white men saving brown women from brown men, right? And she further argues, if you recall, that white men when white women, when they too step in, they begin to share in this white man's burden, right? So then it becomes this kind of competition between white men and white women over who would save the brown women from the brown man, right? If you remember that very interesting argument. So my sense, I was very taken with the fact that you are actually proposing an alternate understanding for the new white women who are now joining the fray, so to speak, right? These volunteers, for instance, who come in to work at the Camilla Academy. But I'm wondering if the reason that they seem different is because of the kind of pressure that the nation state is putting on them, rather than any kind of fundamental transformation that is happening in the host society. In other words, I am not so sanguine about the civilizing missions rhetoric of saving the natives from themselves actually going away, right? And which is why I think there is the way in which the saving Muslim women rhetoric comes back. And I think things have changed in Pakistan and / Bangladesh, and the way in which the nation state is, fundamentally also has changed over the last 50 years, right? So I wondered if you could comment more on that the pressure is actually coming for them to actually appear to shift to a different rhetoric rather than things happening differently in the host country. And then again, very interesting, the argument about digital activism and the way in which you end the paper which you sent me, but I think I did not hear you say it in the oral presentation, presumably because you ran out of time, which is that digital activism produces the capacity to act as savior without entering into a relationship. Just click. That's how the paper ends, which I thought was marvelous. And I thought it was marvelous because it also brought back to mind for me Bruno Latour's very important insight from his early work, Science in Action, where he argues in his discussion of what he calls centers of calculation, which are places, as you know very well, typically where massive amounts of data that have been mobilized from around the world are accumulated and then are worked up as immutable mobiles. And then these centers then gain the capacity, as he argues, to act from a distance upon other places, other peoples, right? It's a very, very important argument that I thought would be worth thinking about. And to quote Latour, there is nothing that man is truly capable of dominating. For many, everything is immediately too large or too small, too mixed or composed of successive layers that dissimulate in view what he would like to observe. Surely, yet one thing and one thing alone is dominated by the gaze. It's a sheet of paper extended on a table or tacked on to a wall. The history of science and technology, to a large degree, tells of ruses that allow the world to be brought onto this paper surface. Then, yes, the mind dominates it and sees it. Nothing can be hidden, obfuscated, or dissimulated, end quote. Now, this was written in 1985, before the emergence of digital apps and all of these kinds of new technologies that have actually made these older Latourian insights even more relevant. And I thought that the argument about digital activism and the politics of it can really go back and look at the old Latour for these kinds of insights. And I wondered if you could comment on that. But thank you all for very rich and interesting papers.